Good afternoon. We're going to take you live now to the Rural Fire Service headquarters for a bushfire update.
And given what our state's been through in the last few days, especially on New Year's Eve, we will be declaring a state of emergency from 9 a.m. tomorrow. That will last 7 days. The reason why we're doing it tomorrow, ahead of Saturday, is to make sure that Commissioner Fitzsimmons and all of the emergency personnel, all of our agencies, all organisations know that from tomorrow they will be subject to forced evacuations, road closures, road openings and anything else we need to do as a state to keep our residents safe and to keep property safe. We don't take these decisions lightly, but we also want to make sure we're taking every single precaution to be prepared for what could be a horrible day on Saturday. We know that temperatures will be in the mid-40s in parts of the state. We also know that there are more fires burning today than we would like to have seen in the milder conditions, which could suddenly flare up and do very unpredictable things on Saturday. We also know that there are a lot of tourists on the move, and allowing us to declare the state of emergency from tomorrow morning will allow us to ensure that we can provide safe access to roads when we need to. We can also provide safe access to and from destinations, as we have been encouraging people to move back home to travel safely ahead of what will be very difficult circumstances on Saturday. Again, we don't take these decisions lightly. I want to thank Commissioner Fitzsimmons for the advice he's provided me through advice he's received from all of our agencies. And I want to thank all of our agencies, whether it's the police, fire and rescue, ambulance, paramedics. Everybody has been working together, doing what is required to keep both our community safe, but also obviously to save as many properties as possible. And we're concerned that conditions on Saturday, given the weather, given the winds, and the Commissioner will speak more specifically about that, given the likely wind conditions, the temperature and the dryness that's in the air, we're concerned that those conditions on Saturday will be worse than what we've experienced in the last few days. And that is cause for concern, given there are, as I said, too many active fires now, and we're making sure we're taking every precaution possible to keep as many people safe as possible and try and save as many properties as possible as well. Commissioner?
Thank you, Premier. So you've seen already that we have focused very much on far south coast of New South Wales, with the leaving now provisions for particularly tourists and holiday makers. And we are very pleased to see the result of the community responding to those advices. Unfortunately, we've seen this afternoon fire activity flare up in the Shoalhaven area, which has impacted the Princes Highway again near the Sussex Inlet Road and Bendalong Road area. There's a bit of fire activity there at the moment, which we're hoping to have wrapped up in the next few hours, so we can again provide clear passage to that part of the road. I say once again, we are all collectively most appreciative of the patience, the focus and the decisions being taken by people down the south coast, but we've still got a very volatile and active fireground situation right across a very broad geographic area of New South Wales. We are hoping to clear that disruption to the Princes Highway over the coming hours, so please be patient and working with police particularly and the RMS when it is safe to do so. It is heavily clogged with smoke and fire is burning on the edge of the road, and there is backburning operations going on right on the edge of the road as we speak. This is not about waiting to clear the road and make it safe from trees and power poles. This is about active fire that's coming back in on the Princes Highway. So as soon as we have that under control, it's a stretch of only about 6 or 7 kilometres, but it's just a risk that's too great to allow cars to be traversing that part of the road. The warning and the alert and the messaging to go out and ask people not to be in these at-risk areas is going to extend beyond just the far south coast. At the moment, we've been talking about Bateman's Bay right down to the Victorian border. We are going to be pushing more information out tonight and tomorrow to start including parts of the Shoalhaven, where we're identifying more potential for the fire to spread into the east, into more populated areas. And then most importantly, given the latest forecast for the weather conditions on Saturday, the risk area is going to extend not just from the far south coast and the Shoalhaven, but right across the west, across the high country, and out to the southern slopes, if you like, the areas west of the high country into places like Tumbarumba and Batlow. There is a big focus on communities like Batlow. There'll be specific advice out around the community of Batlow and surrounds, but effectively from there down through the high country, places like Cudmurra, all the way through Thredbo, Perisher, Jindabyne, all those sorts of areas right across to the coast. There's going to be some real challenges and some very real risks associated with what's being forecast and predicted for fire spread under the sorts of weather conditions we're expecting as we head into Saturday. Last New Year's Eve, what we identified, and the Premier talked about it, was very much that we saw extraordinary fire behaviour with fires, 5 of them burning at the emergency warning alert level from about 8 a.m. Or earlier in the morning. Those fires exceeded all the manual predictions and all the computer-based predictions for what was to be the expected fire spread. As we do routinely, we've rerun a number of those models and those forecasts, and those fires spread at what we call the absolute worst case scenario, which typically is not what happens when it plays out on the ground. So we are applying that methodology given that the conditions on Saturday are likely to be worse than what we experienced on New Year's Eve, and the worst case scenario means that a lot of the areas in that southeast quadrant of the state have the potential to be impacted, and impacted very heavily with the conditions that are forecast on Saturday. We are expecting those conditions on Saturday to see temperatures into the low to mid 40s, very hot, dry air coming out of the centre of Australia, which means humidities will be particularly low. The winds are going to start very much strengthening up from the north, northwest, and swinging around more to the west throughout the day. And those wind strengths, particularly across the ranges, will be coming in at 40, 50, 60 kilometres an hour, and then gusting to 70 to 80 kilometres an hour. That's going to result in widespread severe fire danger ratings, but more importantly through that southeastern quadrant and coming up a little further towards the central ranges, some widespread extreme fire dangers, which present some real challenges for fire behaviour and fire spread across that landscape. There will be a southerly change moving through the state on Saturday, but at this stage it's not forecast to start moving through the state of New South Wales. The southeast corner of the state, down around Eden for example, it's not expected to start moving into that area until about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and then it'll be a fairly slow movement up the coast and probably not hit an area like Sydney until about midnight. So we're going to have a very long, a very difficult day of hot, dry winds dominating out of the west-northwest before a southerly change starts moving through the area. Pretty volatile along the coastal strip, like we saw on New Year's Eve, with the wind strengths on that southerly change along the coastal strip, particularly gusting 70, 80 kilometres or more in some parts. It's going to be a very dangerous day. It's going to be a very difficult day, which is why we're ensuring the highest available orders and arrangements, instruments for the state of New South Wales are in effect. Another precautionary measure that we're taking for the next 2 days is to ensure that there are statewide total fire bans in place for tomorrow and for Saturday, and then that'll be reviewed post-Saturday depending on how fire reacts and how fire spreads and what sort of damage is occasioned as a result of the fire behaviour on Saturday. Any questions?
Commissioner, you paint a pretty bleak picture for the southeast of the state. What about Sydney? What can we expect here? What are you worried about? Where are you worried about?
That's a good point, thank you. We are focusing very much on southeastern quadrant of New South Wales, but not at the exclusion of all these other fires that we've got across the state. We've still got 113 fires burning across New South Wales. We've seen a minor outbreak on the large fire complex northwest of Sydney, up near the Currajong Heights area, west of Bowen Mountain there. Crews have been working on that all day. They're gaining the upper hand, but that containment will be tenuous as we head into the weekend. They'll be continuing to strengthen that containment on the weekend, and the last thing we want is to see an outbreak of fire from that fire complex and heading into more populated areas like the Blue Mountains community along Great Western Highway, or heading into places like Bowen Mountain and the Currajong region and down into northwestern Sydney, for example. We've also still got this complex of fire burning in southwestern Sydney, particularly around the Greenwaddle Creek fire, where it's burning effectively north of Mittagong and burning all the way out towards Wombeyan Caves. We've also got fire that's spotted to the west of places like Warragamba and Silverdale in southwestern Sydney there, western Sydney there. That fire's burning on the western side of the Warragamba Dam there. Again, crews have been doing some remarkable work in an attempt to consolidate that and contain that fire. They will continue to do that whilst ever the more favourable weather conditions present. But again, the containment on that fire across such an enormous fire ground will be tenuous at best when we're going into the conditions that we're expecting to see on Saturday. those widespread severe and extreme conditions are not only going to be concentrated down through the southeast corner, but the severe is likely to spread right up into Greater Sydney environment, the Central Ranges, Illawarra, Shoalhaven, and even the potential moving into the Hunter region. So again, we've got another very large geographic area that's going to see some problematic high-level fire danger ratings moving across, set in across New South Wales.
Premier, could I ask you, please?
Certainly.
We've had communities cut off. Today we're seeing people queuing for fuel, for food, running out of basic supplies in small towns. What are you doing to be able to help some of those people?
No, certainly, and that's an adequate question, and I saw that for myself yesterday when I was down in the region where, what was happening was exacerbated by power shortages, by telecommunications jamming, and of course people not having access to the basics. But I'm relieved today to note that Bateman's Bay in the main has had power restored, which makes a big difference. It means people can access fuel, which they couldn't before, and supplies for that matter. And on New Year's Day, when you have most businesses closed anyway, it's very difficult to people to access supplies. So the situation was no doubt compounded by the impact of the fires, but also by the fact of the time of year it was. So we've certainly taken all that into consideration. And I again want to reiterate our gratitude to everybody for their patience, whether it's locals or whether it's tourists just wanting to get back home. The patience and neighbourly support has been amazing, and I want to thank everybody for their understanding and their patience. I'm relieved to note that the power shortages that were experienced on New Year's Day are still there, but not in any way as severe as they were. So many people have had power restored, and that means that people can take safe refuge with friends and relatives, and also that people can access those basic supplies they weren't able to do so a few days earlier. I also saw, having travelled on and in the vicinity of local roads, the danger that trees, that burnt out trees are posing, burnt out telegraph poles are posing. I mean, I saw for myself things that were literally swaying and ready to come down. We need to make sure that nobody is injured or worse because of things coming down when they're using roads, and that's why it's important for us to be cautious and be safe. And we know that can result in frustration for people, but I'd much rather have people frustrated and get home safely than not feel frustrated and have themselves or a loved one suffer severe injury or worse as a consequence. And that's why we need to be cautious at these times. And I do want to thank in particular the police, fire rescue personnel who've made sure that where people can have access to roads, especially the main roads, that's been made possible, even if it means letting a few cars through at a time where we're closely monitored. And that's what we've had to resort to make sure that people get home safely. We do encourage people to go home. Most of the road network is accessible, but we also do appreciate that for some it is still difficult to access supplies, but it's much easier than when it was yesterday and the day before.
And what about some of the smaller communities that appear to be still cut off? We spoke to Ron Coote this morning.
Yeah.
He was talking about the fact that they're running out of everything and he can't get
Yeah,
home.
well, we certainly have our evacuation centres stood up now, and we've got not only staff but also people providing supplies. And so if people do live in those remote communities and are able to access the evacuation centres, we are encouraging that where they can get supplies. But certainly the larger communities are being serviced to the level they need to. But I appreciate for smaller communities that's difficult, especially when I saw what I did in some of those smaller townships and the damage that's been caused to some businesses and homes. It's understandable that getting the basics is difficult for some, but the evacuation centres should be accessed by people in those situations, and the larger towns have now had in the main, not all of them, but in the main, power restored, which gives them access to vital services.
Following that question, what measures do you have in place in terms of increasing the availability of fuel, petrol and diesel, drinking water and food?
Yeah, well, certainly, as I said, the situation's improved greatly from yesterday. More people have access to power, more people have access to basic supplies than what they did, and we're also ensuring that our evacuation centres have all those supplies on hand for people as well. And I know from the monitoring on the ground that our emergency services personnel will also ensure that if we need to do more to provide those basics to people, we will. But we also need to make sure that we protect our own emergency services personnel in making those distributions, that we're not compromising their safety.
Could you please outline the emergency response plans in place to help people leave the South Coast?
Do you want to talk about? I thought we already answered the question.
Yeah, Premier, Commissioners. Thank you. We've had in place now a plan in terms of the tourists and those people that don't need or want to be up and down the South Coast. It was pivotal around the road network, which is gradually but certainly coming online. And I find now that that if you look at the area south of Narooma, people leaving to the south on the Princess Highway and the Coast Road, whilst those roads are fully loaded with motorists, they are moving, they are getting out, they are getting to their destinations. And of course later this afternoon, that disruption to the Princess Highway near Sussex Inlet, we're very confident that that will again be restored, and we will be able to have people travel both ways, north and south of Bateman's Bay, into the night and certainly tomorrow.
And so is there any contingency plans for telecommunications outages currently and ahead of Saturday?
Yeah, certainly. There's been an enormous amount of work by power and comms area around the State Emergency Management Committee, and we've seen a progressive update and bringing back online of power and communications regularly since that those fires hit the south coast. But we also are very mindful of the fact that we spoke only today about Saturday is a difficult day. We do need to make sure that our evacuation centres are prepared for that, and we do need to make sure that those critical assets that were brought back online are protected as best they can to get us through Saturday.
And also given the new threat emerging south of Eden, will the RFS be able to manage the worsening fire conditions for Saturday?
I can't manage the weather or the subsequent behaviour. What's the question? Sorry.
So given the new threat emerging south of Eden, will the RFS be able to manage
Victorian
the worsening
fires, yeah.
fire conditions?
Oh, so the fires coming from the Victoria, you mean? Sorry.
Going up,
Okay. No, so no, that's right. So there are a number of fires that are burning south of the border. Obviously, the one fire that we had over near Gingelic, just east of Albury there, that fire has burned extensively down in a southeasterly direction through Victoria. That fire is now posing a real threat to the communities through the high country, places like Cabramatta. That's what we're dealing with and planning for. We're also working very closely with our Victorian colleagues in understanding the fire behaviour and the fire movement for the fires further over to the east and the southeast corner of our state and the northeast corner of Victoria, and we're working very closely together with that. And a lot of this planning is in anticipation of the potential for those fires to cross into New South Wales. And indeed, dare I say it, we're talking to our Victorian colleagues for the potential that some of our fires and any new fires might also cross into Victoria as well. So that is happening, and that is fairly routine.
Can I just ask, the Prime Minister said that there have been no requests from the federal support for more federal support in New South Wales. Will you be asking for more assistance from the federal government in the coming days?
Oh, we've certainly already asked and received a lot of assistance from the federal government already, whether it's through the ADF, whether it's through coordination activities, whether it's through aircraft. So the agencies, all levels of government, are working together very closely already. We've made several requests and all those requests have been made. And of course, if situations present themselves, we'll make further requests as well.
Will the Emergency Minister be returning from this trip?
Yes, he is, yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.